Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the AI Spy. Believe it or not, we are in November, and one of my favorite times of the year. There's Thanksgiving. It's the holiday season kicks off. It's also International Fraud Awareness Week, and we have some exciting things planned for you this month through the International Fraud Awareness Week. And to kick it off, we have a powerhouse of a guest. He's a powerhouse in financial crime. He has years of experience in consulting on anti-fraud, digital identity, and fraud prevention. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Anis. Anis, welcome to the show.
You, Anurag. Thank you, AI Spy, for having me on the show, and thank you for a kind introduction, Anurag. It's kind of you.
So, Anis, when we spoke a little over a month ago, we spoke at length about digital public infrastructure. We spoke about UPI, both of us being from India. I think we have our fascination about UPI. And I have been recently on my visit to India. I started using UPI. I was finally able to figure out how to link my old Indian accounts with my phone. And it's such a joy using that. And we'll get into that's our topic today, UPI, but also the rise in banking fraud in India. But before we dive into the topic, Anis, I want to ask you a question, and I ask all my guests this question. How did you get into fraud prevention? What's your origin story?
Excuse me. It was by accident, Anurag. So I always believed that I did not choose anti-fraud as a career, but anti-fraud chose me. Anti-fraud career chose me rather. So what happened was I've been working on some business development and remedial or collection roles in banking industry for some at my early career stage. A sudden opening in anti-fraud came up under some unfortunate circumstances. So many of my colleagues, they applied for that role and I did not. So fortunately, the regional head at that point of time reached out to me asking if I would be interested in this role. So I knew nothing about anti-fraud at that point of time. I kind of suggested to him that he should be considering more suitable candidates. And he was like, I'm not here for your advice. I would like to know if you are interested or not, if you're really interested or not. And I was like, I told him, I know nothing about fraud. So his response was, he said, I didn't know either when I started my career, but we all learn eventually. It's not rocket science. Why I am interested in you is because of the quality of work that you do, and I've seen that, and the workplace ethics that's what is interesting me and my boss to ask you if you'll be interested to. And until this day, I'm grateful to him to place that trust on me. So that's how the actual journey began. And then I kind of learned that anti-fraud has been my passion, and it kept me in this career until now. Again, what excites me about anti-fraud career is that take any institution, we have all this smart intellectual individual minds coming together, putting together design robust policies and processes, and then comes one smart person who takes us all for a ride. So in order to outsmart this person, in order to understand how somebody has compromised the systems, the robust systems, what we believe, you have to think beyond, think ahead. And that really excited me. And now in the digital world, everything happens digitally, so are frauds. And it's kind of become a passion for me to help systems, companies to safeguard and protect themselves and their clients, and kind of bring back a trust in a digital form. So yeah, that's the story. That's how it started.
Yeah, a lot of fraud experts that I speak to, many of them discovered, like you said, we were talking about Yori earlier at the CASA. He's doing a great job there. And I asked him how you got into scam prevention. He said, by accident, we were doing something else. And then that website went away, but Scam Advisor stuck. And then I discovered the world of scams. So okay, now let's dive into UPI. So UPI is an acronym for the Unified Payments Interface. Anyone who is in payments has heard about UPI. I think UPI and Pix in Brazil always get quoted because of the massive scale at which the real-time transactions are being carried out. Before going there, so how has UPI revolutionized transactions there, and how is the public infrastructure, the digital public infrastructure, enabling something like UPI?
UPI has truly revolutionized the digital payments in India. It's making payments accessible to millions, and soon it will be billions plus people who will be using UPI. So UPI is very effective. I mean, I have used UPI during my visits to India as well. the simplicity is really, really amazing. Couple of things that I would say why UPI is so attractive to people is number one, the customer experience. UPI allows seamless real-time transfers and within the fraction of seconds across, different different payment service provider, all through in one single mobile platform, right? So, you can integrate with your bank app, you can, download the PSP app and so on. The second aspect is it's available 24/7, 365 days of the year. So people find it really, really convenient. So imagine, have somebody delivering something at your doorsteps at 10 p.m. in the night, and you don't have to go look for cash or change to give. So you just use UPI, even for, 20, 30 rupees transaction, it can go to several thousands. You can easily use that to make the payment. And the transactions are also very simplified. So unlike normal bank transfer, you can transfer money with the virtual payment address or UPI handle, what they call it as. It could be as simple as Anis HDFC, bank or something. So it's extremely convenient, and it allows the financial inclusion because people in small businesses, they are able to encash immediately. The money is instantly back to their bank account. So it allows the immediate cash flows for businesses, which is extremely important. So that
So the simplicity, I just loved it. This time when I was visiting India in August, I was there. I finally got it working on my phone, and the cross-platform use case, that's brilliant. So there's the three major providers: Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm. But it doesn't matter which app you're using. So I was at a street vendor, and I'm like, I don't have that particular app. He says it doesn't matter which app you have. Just scan the QR code and you can make the payment. And so it's like you said, the user experience, the simplicity of it, and all this cross-platform integration. It was so easy to use. And I think the other point you made was also brilliant, like bringing in a lot of the unbanked population, bringing them into the banking infrastructure. So that's been brilliant. And I think the volume of transactions speak for themselves. But what are some unique aspects, if you have to call out? Are there any unique aspects of UPI that you'd like to call out?
See, I think the virtual payment address is something pretty unique. Like I said, it can be anis at hdfcbank.com, right? So as simple as that, you can make payments to your mobile, and you can also use microtransactions, right? It enables low cost and zero transaction fee transactions for between peer to peer or peer to merchant, customer to merchant, etc., which is critical for a market like India. When you look from the US or whether other Western countries, from dollar value, it may not make sense. But for India, in terms of small, transaction like a street vendor, or like somebody selling for 10 or 20 rupees, UPI still works.
Yeah.
That I think is amazing. They have the solution which caters to the entire population. It caters to the small vendors. It caters to, if I have to transfer money to you, I can just transfer with the UPI handle or virtual payment address, right? I can make a payment online platforms using UPI. I can make a payment on in-store transaction using QR codes. Just scan this QR code and you're able to make the payment. So these aspects are kind of very unique. I think majority of the instant payment platforms globally are taking the examples and the knowledge from how UPI works in India, and they are trying to replicate in other countries. Now with the UPI 2.0 version, there are certain other features that are coming up now, which is like a recurring payments, for example. If you have to make
Mm.
recurring payments, you can use option to mandate it once, and the recurring payments can happen. You can even integrate your overdraft facility where the money can be utilized from there and goes back there. There's another new feature called for business transaction where you can attach the invoices of the business transaction. So it gives a kind of the idea for the merchants to understand where the transaction is coming from, for which transaction or which invoice the payment has been made. It actually kind of helps them very much. And the framework, like you said, it enables Phone Pay, Bharat Pay, and Phone Pay, Google Pay. Google Pay is massive in India. So to integrate seamlessly. And as a result, there is a rapid adoption, expansion, and also it helps in innovating new features and new solutions, new use cases for UPI. I think it's all packaged under one single platform, and that's what I find it's very unique about UPI.
So, Anis, like we spoke about all the positive aspects. There's been obvious. I think that the everyone is using the UPI. People now actually refuse cash. If you offer cash for a purchase, they actually refuse it. This is just you use UPI and send me the payment digitally. So that has led to the massive increase in volume. I was looking at some of the reports today morning. Around 80 billion transactions in the first 6 months of 2024, which is staggering in terms of uh, the volume of transaction, but the value is also very high. I think 150 billion US dollars worth of transactions. You mentioned that the ticket size of the transactions is not as high. The average transaction value is around $30, but $30 converted into Indian rupees, I think that's still a large sum and can be a sizable transaction for exchange of goods and services. But with the rise of the volume and value, there comes the darker side. That's the fraud. While we've seen tremendous popularity adoption, we've also seen a massive increase in fraud on this payment rail. So there's somewhere around 400% increase in online payments fraud in India. So is there something inherent in UPI, or what is driving this massive or sharp rise in the fraud alongside the growth of UPI?
Like most innovations, Anurag, there are flip sides to real-time payments as well. The usual question in any innovation is it if it's manageable, right? Can you manage the risk or the flip side to this innovation? I believe that fraud is one of the inherent challenges, and it's becoming one of the biggest challenges for real-time payment platform globally speaking. And the same applies with India. The very nature of its existence, the instant payment, it also makes it the biggest challenge in form of once the transaction is done, it's not reversible. You cannot reverse the transaction because the money goes instantly to someone, and unless the beneficiary wants to give back the money, you receive it. If not, that doesn't happen. So fraudsters, their objective is get the money as soon as possible. So the very nature of this transaction, UPI or instant payment, is one main challenge that exists. Second is there are weak security practices. The practice of binding the device is very weak, not only for UPI but also in many other instant payment platform. We still rely on SMS texts to bind the device. And most of the payment service providers and bank apps in India, the way it works is you download the app, you give your account number, and SMS gets generated from your phone, which is kind of your device information that goes in an encrypted form to the service provider or to the bank. And when the bank looks at it, it's like, who does this number belong to? 1234. It's in the system. It says Anurag. Then they bind that particular device information to Anurag's profile. Now the challenge with it is the scammers, they convince the victims to send scammers device information to UPI or the bank in this instant payment platform. So what they do is they generate on their phones, they WhatsApp to the potential victims and ask the potential victim to text this long text code or device information from their registered mobile number to the bank or to the payment service provider. The National Payment Corporation of India, they saw this as a huge risk, and what they did was they reduced the timing to 40 seconds. That the moment the SMS gets generated, by the time the SMS reaches and gets validated in the bank or PSP app, it has to happen within 40 seconds. But what fraudsters have done is they have outsmarted that, talk to their potential victims, make sure that they are ready to instantly send the message, and they beat the purpose. The 40-second purpose is not not been helpful at all. So the way the device is bound is an inherent challenge to this process. And what happens after is people rely on static pins. Most of the bank apps or PSP apps, they rely on a static pin when you send the money. And pin is something which can be easily shareable, easily compromisable. So I think the weak security is a real challenge there, and that's one of the reasons why frauds happen. The digital adoption and the adoption of digital literacy, there's a huge gap in between that.
Right.
UPI, banks, and PSPs, they came up with fantastic videos and steps how to people can install and adapt adopt to this. However, they have not created adequate awareness on the risk and security aspect, and that is being one of the challenges. Data breaches are very, very common. There has been so many data breaches on Aadhaar card information and other personal identifiable information. It's becoming increasingly common. India is among the top 10 countries where the cybersecurity incidents or data breach incidents are extremely high, and information is easily available in so many forms and in so many places in dark webs and for scammers and criminals to exploit.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please, Anurag.
No, I was going to say that Aadhaar is what most people use to link. Aadhaar is like the unique identifiable. Yeah, it's the unique identifier for a citizen. It's like the not the equivalent of an SSN in the US, but something more than just the tax ID. It's your identity almost.
Absolutely. I mean, Aadhaar could have, in my view, Aadhaar could have played far bigger role than what it is playing today. We can actually exploit Aadhaar to make, it as one of the robust platforms, but it hasn't happened for various reasons. See, while UPI doesn't publish, so NPCI doesn't publish facts, statistics on UPI frauds. There are some, figures here and there that you can take and relate. RBI says that the digital frauds are about 175 million for the last year. However, CI worldwide, they published a report where only the push payment frauds are about $394 million. And they're anticipating it to go up to 612 million by 2027.
So these are scams alone. Push payment frauds are
Push payment scams alone.
scams.
Exactly. And majority of these losses are from UPI. Now, I've been speaking to some very senior person, and somebody gave me an estimate of about 150 to 250 reported incidents in UPI every year. But my take is that these numbers, they do not represent even 1/3 of the actual.
Yeah. And so these scams, I understand like people are getting scammed, but the traditional ways like the device takeovers, the SIM swapping, because if you're relying on SMS as the way, those still apply. And I'm assuming those are still in play.
Yes, of course. See, social engineering is very popular in India. People kind of believe, and there are some inherent challenges to India. Trust is something which is there and still not there. People want to believe, technology, but still they are a little skeptical about things. And the transition from being a technologically backward country to extremely advanced country in payments, the transition has happened so fast that people weren't able to catch up with understanding what are the pros and cons of it. Now, say, like you said, UPI does about 500 million transactions a day, around $8.2 billion in transaction volume. Just apply 1% of it to fraud. We're talking about $80 million fraud, or about $30 million annually. Nowhere it reflects. I'm talking about just 1%. Nowhere it reflects in any of the reports that comes out, both official and unofficial channels in India, that the fraud could be so massive. We're just talking about small numbers. So I believe the numbers are not reported, registered adequately, and it's a bigger problem than what we actually believe. And in my view, frauds and scams will soon become national security problem in countries like India and countries like Brazil, and even in countries like Saudi Arabia, where the scams are anticipated to go up by about 250% or something. So it's a big.
Yeah, I think you made a great point about digital literacy and the adoption. So, just speaking from something personal, my mom skipped one level in between. So, she was a person who would walk into a bank. You remember the passbook? We are both old enough to remember what a passbook is. So, she used to go to the bank, and that's how she used to get her money withdrawn when a teller would and make an entry in a notebook and give her hand out the cash. And then there was the ATM cards where you could go and use the ATM machine. So she skipped the entire ATMs. So she was a passbook person, and from that she moved on to UPI. So that's like you said, that's a huge jump for people to make. and with that comes its own challenges.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I was when I was reading about UPI and UPI scams, two things that came up that was very interesting and probably in a as well was digital arrests and job scams. Can you talk about what is a digital arrest scam?
In fact, yesterday there were some articles in Indian media where the Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke about digital arrest scams and what are the do's and don'ts of it. So imagine the Prime Minister of a country talking about digital arrest form. It's becoming a really huge challenge because a lot of people are falling prey to it, and these are raising in alarming levels and pretty common in India. So fraudsters do exploit this fear factor and lack of familiarity on the judicial processes and digital processes and so on. During pandemic, some of the judicial authorities were conducting some cases over video calls, right? So we all are familiar with that. Now, many people are not familiar because they don't have a challenge, they don't have a legal case or anything for them to have the knowledge about how things work. So the lack of familiarity is kind of favoring fraudsters. So what happens in a digital scam is fraudsters, they pretend to be law enforcement officials or regulatory officials. They reach out to victims over the telephone or WhatsApp message, claiming that the victim's identity has been linked to some illegal activity, some money laundering or unauthorized
Mhm.
transactions. The scammers then threaten that in the event it's not resolved, there will be some immediate arrest and severe legal consequences that victim has to pay unless the victim pays a processing fee or a penalty to resolve the issue. They would have to go through the detention process and so on. It's unfortunate that many fall prey to this scam. Even some well educated senior professionals, they have fallen prey to it, and it exists in society, in Indian society, because of one, lack of legal awareness. People are not familiar with how the judicial and law enforcement work. And the moment you use the words like money laundering, cyber crime, they are kind of intimidating. And
Yes.
people. And second, there's also a perception of corruption in the law enforcement agencies. While
Mhm.
many respect law enforcement agencies, there are also some pervasive belief that corruption is there in the system. I would get exploited in case I don't resolve this matter at the earliest. And again, this reflects on the overall trust on the judicial and law enforcement systems. It's a mixed view, I would say. People have mixed sentiments towards it. Some believe law enforcement and judicial authority, there is fairness in the way things work, and on the other hand, people are worried about potential delays in case there is a actual legal challenge or actual legal case that can happen, and the inefficiencies and misuse of power, these elements can kind of erode the public trust.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's another aspect to it. If you look at it from instant payment perspective, the instant payment platform has become so widely used in India and so common that you end up making funds or receiving funds from so many individuals whom you know well or you don't know them, or just interact them during the course of business or making a payment. It could be as simple as making a payment to a grocery shop, or when you pick up something. During this process, what in case if I make a transaction to somebody who is linked to some cyber crime and or money laundering
Yeah.
gangs, right? Those aspects also scare people. That's why the awareness of instant payment and how things work from the judicial perspective, it's extremely important for people to be aware of, so that they prevent themselves from falling prey to the scams.
So I don't know if you know the answer, but to this question, like the digital arrest scams, these scamsters, are these people who are based in India, or are these like international actors? Because whoever it is, I think they have a great understanding of how things work in India. I think some of the points that you made, the lethargy in the judicial process. Nobody wants to get involved in a court case in India. I don't want to get involved in a court case anywhere, but particularly not in India because it can be slow and it can drag out. So that's one. So
I think it's predominantly the syndicates are from India for this particular modus operandi. And I have first-hand experience. About a year ago, I was visiting India, and my sister, she receives calls from a different city in India, from a different city, and they were like, "Hey, you were holding an ABN AMRO bank card, and there's an outstanding that you haven't settled or paid, and if you don't make the payment immediately, we would have to send the cops to your home to arrest you or your spouse." And they were not giving the information or the name of the cardholder. They continued to call, and some point of time she felt a little intimidated. She reached out to me. Fortunately, I was there at that point of time. She reached out to me and said, "Hey, listen, I'm getting a call like this. I mean, do you believe something like this can happen? Because we were holding an ABN AMRO bank card long time ago, and I don't remember having any outstanding on that card. We don't use it anymore. We closed the card, but I'm not sure if there are some fee that are applied, or late payment fees, or any other charges that were applied on the outstanding, which is causing this." She was a bit kind of skeptical about it. So I said, "Okay, let me talk to the person." And I knew for sure that it's not the legitimate call. It's from scammers. So I asked a couple of questions to them, and I told them, "Hey, you're talking to someone who advises law enforcement agencies on these matters. Give me who's the card name of the card holder. Give me the outstanding as on date, and the card expiry date, and so on." They didn't have the expiry date. They didn't have the name of the card holder. Somehow they received the number, and the card number and the telephone number. So I told them, "Listen, if you don't stop this now, I would have to call the cops and inform you about this, inform them about this scam that you are trying to do." And yeah, they stopped it. So imagine that. It's the tactics they use are intimidating. And ABN AMRO portfolio was acquired by Royal Bank of Scotland, and Royal Bank of Scotland portfolio got acquired by someone. I mean, they're talking about a card that was available maybe 10, 12 years ago. How do you get hold of this information? Why is this information available so easily? Where do they get that? That's the kind of questions we should be surprised about, because data is available everywhere in India.
Yeah, yeah. I think again, you mentioned this earlier, like the data breaches, they have partial information and they are creating these calls at scale to see, and it didn't work out here. But even if one case sticks, they will recover the investment that they're putting into making these calls.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned a few things. I mean, a train like coaching of use of digital infrastructure awareness seems like one of the most important counter fraud measures. But what others measures can be applied here in this situation for UPI?
With regards to fraud and scam in general, so let me give you some examples of how certain countries are trying to address this fraud problem, right? For example, the UK, the payment systems regulator, has mandated reimbursing up to 85,000 pounds on the push payment fraud. Singapore has proposed a shared liability model on reimbursement between the banks and telco companies. Netherlands has some limited reimbursement on impersonation frauds. Australia has proposed some huge penalties on penalizing the banks, telcos, and technology companies like Facebook or Google and so on if they fail in protecting the consumers from scams. Europe is also considering something similar to that. Even in India, there are some proposals. There are some legislation which are proposed for reimbursing the scam victims. UK is also introducing friction in instant payment process. US is also considering that. If you follow some discussions on LinkedIn in the anti-fraud community, people are talking about introducing friction in the real-time payment process. In the UK, banks can hold an instant payment for up to 72 hours if they suspect the transfer to be fraud.
Yeah.
Allow me to give this analogy of on the friction aspect now. In the last discussion we had, I spoke about it. Highways are built to improve commerce between two cities. If you add speed bumps to the highway, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Instead, you must add speed radars or speeding cameras to ensure only violators are impacted, not the compliant drivers. In the same way, when you introduce friction in some form, you're impacting majority of the diligent customers. So on the topic of regulation, the reimbursement process, it's kind of adding pressure to the banks and technology companies and telco companies to deploy the right tools and technologies to prevent scams. However, my personal belief is that these are short term benefits and it may not be a sustainable model for certain reasons. Number one, we have seen in the past banks and payment companies, they will find a way to pass the losses back to the consumers. So it will increase the cost of fraud in the payment industry. Eventually, what will happen is the services or transaction fees will go up. For now,
Yeah.
in most of the countries, there is no transaction fee on real-time payments. However, if reimbursement is applied on frauds and scams, already these banks and PSPs are under tremendous pressure to have the right and well equipped infrastructure to facilitate this payment, because the cost of this infrastructure is very high.
Yeah.
Imagine 500 million transactions in a day
Yeah.
facilitated by say 500 odd entities. The platforms have to be extremely fast and extremely capable of handling that volume. That itself is a cost to the facilitators. On top of it, if fraud has to be the fraud amount has to be refunded, it might not be a sustainable model. And eventually what will happen is banks or PSPs, they'll follow the Visa card or MasterCard model by charging some transaction fee to it. Already in India, there are discussions around it. Number two, it will increase friendly fraud. On Amazon and platforms similar to Amazon, we are seeing a significant rise in the friendly fraud, where I, as a consumer, I know the loopholes in the claim process and the refund and reimbursement process. So I do the fraud and report false claims.
Yeah.
So I can get somebody outside the country or from another city to do the fraud in a way and report it as a fraud or scam so that I get the money back. So in the long term, such solution may not be feasible. And I believe to make this model sustainable, the administrations or government should equip banks and payment ecosystem players with the right tool to counter the frauds in a right way. So when you talk about countering fraud, UPI is a digital public infrastructure, right? In a way, it's extremely capable, excellent for payment facilitations. We would need something similar to that for identity resolution, where participating entities can utilize the functionalities of that infrastructure at different stages of payment lifecycle. So to give an example, in the United Arab Emirates, we have something like Emirates Identity, which is used for every interaction with the government or the private sector body. For example, like Aadhaar in India, you take when you want to purchase a SIM card, use an Aadhaar card. But what they do here is they use biometric features and so on. At the same time, the banks have the ability to use that infrastructure at different stage of the banking or payment life cycle. So they are able to identify who is doing this transaction, who is the actual beneficiary. So it's not the
Right.
who's the actual individual behind the identity and so on. It's clearly mapped, it's linked, and in the event something goes wrong, there are audit trails to understand what is the source, what is the origin. So such infrastructures are extremely important in fighting fraud. So fraud is kind of become an identity problem. If you really want to fight fraud, you need to understand the identity behind that. And today, most of the institutions, whether it's banks or payment service providers or others, they don't interact with the individuals or their customers. They interact with the devices of the customers. So the digital identity plays a very, very crucial role. So like if you separate fraud into two aspects, like fraud where an unauthorized transaction takes place, and scam where an authorized transaction takes place, in payment terms I'm talking about, frauds have to be countered with robust identity infrastructure, which is facilitated by the government officials. And for scams, it's a different ballgame altogether. For scams, it's challenging because the payment or the transfer is conducted by the victim, believing that he or she is doing transferring the money for the intended purposes. That doesn't usually happen. So the most effective solution for scams would be to create a data sharing consortium that is led by the government, can help the participating entities to validate the payment intelligence there. Now, if you do not go by the government led consortium, it will be Visa card or MasterCard,
Right.
where the cost of transaction, the cost of doing business increases substantially because the ecosystem players get a percentage of the transaction value. So, and data sharing platform is widely discussed in UK and G7 countries, and Australia, on how to share data, in an anonymous way for the ecosystem players to benefit from it. I think these two are extremely important. One, to have a robust digital public infrastructure for identity, digital identity management, and also have a data sharing consortium for the ecosystem players to benefit from it.
Yeah, I think confirmation of pay type solution, that something can be facilitated using the data that you mentioned about the data sharing. So blacklists of known fraudsters that can other banks. If one bank suffers, the other bank doesn't have to. So those data sharing agreements are in place.
At the end of the day, it's all about intelligence, payment intelligence. Is that a solution for scams? The solution is already there. The solution has been there for a long time. We are
Yeah,
not using it for a different
using it.
use case. Ever since the cards business is in existence, we have consortiums like Visa Card and Master. There were several players in that, in forming consortium. Like in the US, I'm seeing that every technology service provider is forming a consortium and they're trying to link it with other players. It's not going to help, right? So the same thing happened with companies like Visa, Master. There were 2 dozen companies which were in different part of the globe. Eventually, they got acquired, or they went out of business, and companies like Visa, Master, Amex, and JCP and others survive. So all you need to do is replicate similar model, but this time it has to be government or administration led rather than private led models.
Yeah, and I think the cost plays also an important factor. Anis, we are coming up on time, but I wanted to ask you two last, maybe one question, but two parts to it. One of the things I enjoy about your posts is the memes that you post from time to time, the fraud memes that you post from time to time. So, what's the inspiration? I absolutely love them, but what's the inspiration, and how do you think of these?
So, see, fraud is a serious topic, right? We always talk about statistics, numbers, something went wrong here, something went wrong there, in different parts of the world. I've come to learn that, people like humor
Yeah,
and message conveyed in a humorous way. People, understand that quite well.
yeah,
So while I publish this report, these articles, and my view on what frauds are, time to time, there's short messages through some videos or through some anime cartoons and so on, the images, and I've seen the response is very good. And yeah, I think that's the reason I do that. It's kind of I've learned from my travels to Japan, and you in Japan, wherever you go, you'll see some animation,
yeah,
people trying to convey some message through animation. Whether you're on the metro, there'll be messages, to allow the pregnant or elderly,
yeah.
people to sit down and so on. But messages are very simple, but in an animated way. So I believe the visual communication through humor has a better perception and understanding than the serious topics, and that's why I do that.
I completely agree. I mean, growing up, I remember reading the newspapers and seeing R.K. Lakshman's
There
cartoons,
you
and he used to be the common man, very small, very serious thing, but depicted in a very humorous way. So, I can look forward to. I hope you continue finding new themes and new memes around that. The last question I want to ask is around the fraud fellas. So, what can you tell us about the fraud fellas? I know you've been operating in stealth for a while, but what can you tell us about the fraud fellas at this?
So, see, the objective of fraud fillers was, it was created with a vision to raise adequate awareness on frauds and scams. And the idea was to bring some global expertise together to talk about the emerging trends, the current trends, the best practices, and take a deep dive in from a different what do you call, so brainstorm a little bit on different best practices. There are some things which we do here in the UAE which may not be applicable in the US, but there are certain things that you do in the US which which may be applicable here. And if you look at it, the trends, they slowly start in one place, then they become global.
Yes.
So if you share some best practices, it actually helps others to learn from it or improvise those suggestions, right? You would have seen one of my articles some time ago on SIM swap fraud, how we prevented SIM swap fraud in the UAE, right? It's a simple way which we did. And I spoke to someone from Europe the other day. They were like, wow, Anis, it's simple but it's so effective, let me try it to sell this within my organization. So it may benefit others. So the idea is to to talk about it. Additionally, we want to amplify the voice of victims, right? So there are scam survivors who have been impacted financially, they have been impacted emotionally, and we want to give this as a platform for them to provide the first hand, to underscore the scale and the impact they have experienced themselves. So that's the purpose, we thought we'll do this here. And there's a huge scope for it. For now, it's a non-profit initiative, and I'm hoping that we will make a impactful platform for people to benefit from it.
Yeah, great. I look forward to it. And I enjoy your LinkedIn posts because they're always, the memes are funny, but then the other posts where you share global scam trends from across the globe, some of the learnings from based on your experiences and best practices. So that's all great. Is LinkedIn the best place to follow you so that our listeners can, and we'll tag your profile on the show
Yes.
notes?
Unfortunately, I'm only on LinkedIn for now. I'm not on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok for now. Soon I may have, enter those platforms, but for now I'm on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay, great. Anis, thank you for taking time out today and spending quality time with us. We went deep into this topic and it deserves the attention that we gave it. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show, for taking time out.
Thank you once.
Thank you. So everyone, that's a wrap for today. We'll be back again with another A-lister. Like Anis said, let's all do our bit in raising awareness around fraud. We're celebrating International Fraud Awareness Week, so let's share any tools, any information that can help us. I'll see you again in my next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.